Israel is coming under attack on all fronts, in Gaza, in the north, and within Judea and Samaria. In Gaza, the IDF has been operating in the south and central areas. On the northern border, heavy cross-border exchanges with Hezbollah, and in Samaria, pursuing a terrorist gunman who wounded 3 Israelis. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the report.
Day 284 of the war in Gaza. The forces of Division 162 continue fighting in the Rafah area. Over the past 24 hours, IDF ground forces eliminated a number of terrorists in coordination with the Air Force. They also located and destroyed a number of tunnel shafts in the area and destroyed additional terrorist infrastructure that posed a threat to IDF forces. The Alexandroni Brigade is operating in the center of the Gaza Strip. They carried out raids against 40 terrorist targets in the area using fighter jets and aircraft. Among the targets that were attacked were sniper and observation posts, military buildings, and terrorist infrastructure. Turning north, Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets from Lebanon toward Kiryat Shmona and the surrounding area. Most of the rockets were intercepted and no injuries were reported. The barrage follows an attack by an Israeli aircraft on a car in Syrian territory near the Lebanese border. That attack eliminated a Hezbollah commander and also businessman Mohammed Bara al-Qatarji, close to the Assad regime. The businessman served as a money changer who helped finance Hezbollah and other organizations in the region. The cross-border attacks are ongoing. The Air Force struck a military storage facility in the Jabal region alongside a Hezbollah military structure in Kafar Kila in South Lebanon. And in Samaria, 3 Israelis were lightly wounded today when terrorists opened fire on a vehicle. The injured were an adult and 2 teens hurt by shattered glass. They were transferred to hospital for treatment. Over 50 bullets were reportedly fired. The gunman fled the scene after the shooting with the IDF in pursuit. The shooting took place at the Ramim intersection in northern Samaria near Beit Lid and the Jewish community of Shavei Shomron. After the shooting, the head of the Samaria Council, Yossi Dagan, said, "There is a war in Judea and Samaria, just like there is a war in Gaza and on the northern border."
And the United States remains optimistic yet realistic over a potential hostages for ceasefire deal, insisting that the remaining gaps could be bridged to secure the release of 120 hostages still being held in captivity by Hamas. The details in the following report. The United States State Department said on Monday that it believes the remaining gaps between Israel and Hamas in the hostage for ceasefire deal can be bridged. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Israeli National Security Advisor Tzachi Hanegbi and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer on Monday to discuss the hostages deal. According to a statement from the State Department, Blinken once again underscored the United States' ironclad commitment to Israel's security and discussed practical solutions to resolve the remaining issues on the table in ongoing ceasefire negotiations. He also called on Israel to take further steps to reduce civilian casualties and reiterated the need to ensure humanitarian aid is delivered throughout Gaza. The U.S. Secretary of State also discussed the threat from Hezbollah on Israel's northern border and discussed the importance of avoiding further escalation and reaching a diplomatic resolution. U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said in a press conference following the meeting that the U.S. remains optimistic, yet realistic at the same time.
I will tell you what we heard directly from 2 senior advisors to Prime Minister Netanyahu today, and that is that Israel is still committed to reaching a ceasefire, that Israel wants to reach a ceasefire. Obviously, they want to protect their interests. We understand that as part of the negotiating process, but they do want to reach a ceasefire and are committed to these negotiations. As I said, there are a few remaining sticking points, and we're working to try and resolve those.
Meanwhile, UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, on his first official visit to Israel, met with the families of hostages, together with Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog.
I hope that we see a hostage deal emerge in the coming days, and I am using all diplomatic efforts. Indeed, last week with the G7 nations, and particularly with Tony Blinken, pressing for that hostage deal.
Intense efforts are underway to secure a hostages for ceasefire deal, but gaps still remain. And on day 284 of the war in Gaza, 120 hostages remain in captivity. Joining us now in the studio with more on the hostages deal is member of Knesset for the Yesh Atid party, Sheli Tal Meron. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So on the one hand, we are hearing optimism from the United States that the differences between Israel and Hamas are bridgeable. A willingness from Israeli officials, Hanegbi and Dermer, to push forward a hostage deal. Yet on the other hand, we're seeing a delay in the talks that were supposed to take place this week in Qatar, in Doha. What can you tell us? I mean, do you share the optimism expressed by the United States?
Well, as you've said, it's been 284 since this war started, and we still have 120 hostages, among them 16 women. And it's high time to bring them back home, that's for sure. And, I've sat in different studios and spoke about an upcoming deal so many times. So I've learned by my lesson, and I'm very careful with what I say. But there is some sort of a sense in the air that this time it's more optimistic than before. Hopefully it will come through. Of course, we support a deal. I hate calling it a deal because this is not a business deal or a real estate deal. So I prefer calling it an agreement to save the hostages. And of course, we support such a decision from the Prime Minister, and we've even offered him a safety net in case he has problems with the extremists within his government to sign such a deal. But as we've heard from President Biden before, this is the Prime Minister's deal. He offered it. So I'm very hopeful that this time it will come through. Truly, we do not have any more time. They are dying there every single day. They're going through horrific sexual assault there. And we need to save them as soon as possible, everyone, the ones who are still living, and unfortunately, those of them who are no longer alive.
And the Prime Minister has come under some criticism for saying that there are certain red lines that he will not cross. Do you disagree with that assessment, or do you agree that there are certain red lines that Israel cannot cross?
First of all, every country in the world has red lines. There is no such thing that there are no red lines. Of course, there are red lines. Having said that, I think that the decision to bring back the hostages is the most important decision for this government to make at this point. And we will have a price to pay. There is no question about it. Nobody thinks that we're going to release traffic offenders from prisons, right? We're going to release terrorists. It's horrible. It's a high price. But what is a price of a human life? How can you measure a human life and say, this is the price? This is not buying something in the supermarket. And therefore, yes, we will pay a price, but the highest price for the state of Israel is not bringing them back home, because the basic contract between a state and its civilians is protecting them. And the state of Israel has failed to do so on October 7th. Now is the time to redeem ourselves and to bring them back home and let the entire people of Israel know that the government is protecting their civilians.
And I also do want to discuss the conditions of the hostages. You mentioned especially, of course, the female hostages who are being held for over 9 months now. Now, you've been one of the few members of Knesset truly advocating and lobbying on behalf of the hostages, and under the committee that you chair, you've revealed to the world, really, some of the details of the sexual violence that the hostages are enduring, have endured, and are continuing to endure today. I mean, what can you tell us about this?
Well, I established 2 caucuses in the Knesset. The first one is for the hostages, and the second one is for people who went through sexual assault during this war. That is on October 7th, and unfortunately, right now in Gaza. And we have a lot of information and testimonies and evidence and forensic evidence showing that there was sexual assault on October 7th. And, in one of the assemblies that I held at the Knesset, we had hostages who returned, who shared with us what they went through there, what they witnessed, and what they know is happening. So we cannot ignore this situation, and it's been over 9 months. We can only imagine that these young girls might be pregnant or might even have babies there. That's a horrific thought. It's something that it's undescribable, but we have to keep that in mind. And when I heard Aviva Siegel, who is a hostage that was released, and her husband is still there, by the way, a 64-year-old woman who felt like she was the mother of some of the hostages there, the young girls. And she knows what they went through, and she saw it with her own eyes. And her heart breaks when she talks about this. And, you know, it's unthinkable. When I think about these young girls, I think about my own daughter. It could have been any one of us. It could happen to any Israeli. And we have a responsibility. And I've been speaking about this both in Israel and, you know, outside of Israel. I've been traveling Europe and other areas to discuss the hostages and to discuss the sexual assault, because the world is speaking only about Gaza. The narrative is not about October 7th. It's not about the hostages and not about the sexual assault. And so for me to bring awareness to this situation is very important. And that is why 2 months ago, I think, I established the global coalition to acknowledge the sexual assault as war weapons, because this is a new method of terror. These are war crimes, and we should unite with all countries around the world against this new method of terror. And fortunately, we have countries that are supporting us with this initiative, and we plan to do a lot of work in that regards. And the main purpose is to help women around the world, and among them, of course, are women hostages. And I just want to say, it's not only women who went through sexual assault. Unfortunately, it's also men. The only difference is that the women can get pregnant.
You know, we have seen really so much denial about the atrocities committed on October 7th, the sexual atrocities committed on October 7th, and of course, that are continuing with the hostages today. Do you feel that your work internationally is having an impact, is making a difference, you know, that women's rights organizations are finally coming around, are finally seeing what really took place?
That's such a great question. You know, early on in the war, when this just started and we realized what had happened, I issued letters to all organizations. I had the women members of the Knesset sign these letters that we issue to UN Women, to Me Too, to human rights organizations around the world. And they all ignored my letters, and they did not reply it. They did not condemn what Hamas has done. And they were completely silent. And Israeli women, me among them, we felt betrayed, because we would fight for women's rights before the war. I would fight together with these organizations to help out women throughout the world. And we were completely alone. Now, UN Women has issued a report in the beginning of March. It was a first step. It was too late and too little, but it's something. And I think ever since I've been traveling different countries and doing a lot of international media, I've tried to, you know, give this as much awareness as possible. That's my life mission right now. And I can tell you, when I meet ministers from around the world, I tell them, listen, when you speak about humanitarian aid in Gaza, and that's your right to do so, and it's okay, you have to speak about the humanitarian aid for our hostages. You have to speak about them too, and I've met many ministers, both here in Israel and outside of Israel, and they've done so. So sometimes when you meet these people and you request them to do things, they do it. And also, I think it's very, very important to have personal relationships with it. It's very different from watching a video or doing a Zoom meeting. When you meet the minister face-to-face, or a senator or a member of parliament, and you create this, you know, connection with them, and they want to help you out. So I think that it does have an impact, but, you know, I'm only one person. I'm from the opposition, and I wish we would have more and more people advocating for this cause, because it's very, very important.
Just one person, but making a very important difference. MK Sheli Tal Meron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And now a word from Sheba Tel Shomer Hospital.
Since the Hamas attacks on October 7th, American Friends of Sheba Medical Center has stepped up in an extraordinary way. They've raised more than $35 million, ensuring the victims of the massacre and the soldiers who are fighting for Israel continue to receive life-saving treatments and rehabilitation. American Friends of Sheba has arranged for more than 150 volunteers to travel to Israel, providing critical support to the nation's largest and most comprehensive medical center. Be a part of the Sheba. Stand for health. Stand for Israel. Donate now.
And the European Union has announced sanctions against far-right Israelis and a group trying to block aid to Gaza. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
The EU has announced a new round of sanctions against far-right activists and an Israeli organization trying to block humanitarian aid from reaching Gaza. Targeted was Tzav Tesha, an activist group that opposes the delivery of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip amid the war with Hamas and attempts to sabotage it, sometimes violently. The bloc sanctioned far-right activists Benzi Gopstein and Baruch Marzel, as well as settler activists Moshe Sharvit, Tzvi Bar Yosef, and Issachar Man. Sharvit and Bar Yosef's illegal outposts, known as Moshe's Farm and Tzvi's Farm, were also sanctioned. All of the individuals, apart from Marzel, have already been sanctioned by the United States. As a result of the EU sanctions, the people listed will be subject to an asset freeze and a travel ban to the EU. Both direct and indirect funding of any of their entities are prohibited.
And only 2 days after an assassin's bullet grazed his right ear, former U.S. President Donald Trump received a hero's welcome at the Republican National Convention underway in Milwaukee. Trump shared the spotlight by announcing that Ohio Senator J.D. Vance will be his running mate. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the report.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump made a triumphant appearance during the first night of the Republican National Convention, receiving an ovation from the party faithful just 2 days after a would-be assassin's bullet grazed his right ear.
Energized, energized. I'm up for it, baby. Too bad it's not November 5th now.
I love it. I love it. It stands for his greatness, his legacy. It just keeps growing and keep growing and keep growing. It is unbelievable, historic time. We are part of this history. We love President Trump. Let's go, baby.
The big news on the opening night of the convention was Trump's announcement of the selection of Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate for vice president. James David Vance is a freshman U.S. Senator from Ohio who has made support for Israel an exception to his America First vision of foreign policy. The selection of the 39-year-old Vance represents a full embrace of the growing isolationist wing of the Republican Party, which has pushed back against U.S. military aid for Ukraine while maintaining support for security assistance to Israel. Vance explained his worldview in May, saying, "I'm supportive of Israel and the war against Hamas. I certainly admire the Ukrainians who are fighting against Russia, but I do not think that it is in America's interest to continue to fund an effectively never-ending war in Ukraine." Trump is set to formally accept the party's nomination on Thursday and will face Democratic President Joe Biden in the November election, unless Biden is replaced as the candidate at the Democratic National Convention next month.
And joining us now with more on former U.S. President Trump's pick of J.D. Vance as his running mate is Rabbi Tuli, founder of Israel 365. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Lidar.
So, big news as former President Trump announces his running mate, J.D. Vance. What do we know about him, especially when it comes to Israel?
Well, number one, I love that he's from Ohio. I'm from Ohio. He's from Middletown, Ohio, like in the Southwest, a small town in Appalachia. He's an American success story, but I also love that picture of him at the Kotel, at the Western Wall, when he was here 2 years ago. I got to meet him briefly, and he talked about his love for Jerusalem and how Jerusalem, what he said, is the most important cultural heritage site in the world.
Incredible. So, you know, there were a number of possible nominees that Trump could have picked. Some speculated on DeSantis or others with a very pro-Israel track record. Do you think this is a good pick for Trump when it comes to his policy on Israel? I mean, especially when you compare him, for example, to former Vice President Mike Pence, who really had a true love of Israel.
I think that J.D. Vance is a great replacement for Mike Pence, and for a few reasons. Number one, he's a great American success story. He pulled himself up. He built himself up from really a very challenging childhood and had great success as an entrepreneur, as an author, and as a senator and in politics. He represents really the next generation of conservative Republican leadership. And of course, he's a Make America Great Again guy. He's an American First president, which a lot of Jews and a lot of Israelis are nervous about, but it's not scary, right? America needs to be a great country in order for Israel to be strong. And so he is very clear. He distinguishes his stance on Ukraine, where he's against American support for the never-ending war in Ukraine, and he's very supportive of Israel finishing the war against Hamas.
And right, and he just made comments yesterday calling on Israel to finish the war. This sort of raised some eyebrows here in Jerusalem. I mean, can you maybe expand on that?
Well, in his foreign policy perspective, he outlined in a speech to the Quincy Institute, he said that his foreign policy really rests on two things. Number one is that American industrial economy has to be very strong for the American foreign policy to be strong, but he also says something really important for us. He says that American foreign policy is based on the middle class's moral instincts. American middle class moral instincts. And he says that as a Christian, America will, as a Christian, he supports Israel, and America will always support Israel because its moral instincts are to be with Israel. As the country with the largest Christian majority, he says that America will always stand with Israel. That's something really important for us to internalize, that Israel should embrace its Jewish identity and not be afraid of American first policies and an American first administration.
That's an interesting point that you raised, because many in Jerusalem were really looking to Trump to see who he would pick and if that would be sort of indicative of his continued pro-Israel foreign policy like we saw during his first term. So my question really is, do you think a second Trump administration is going to be as favorable towards Israel as the first?
I think even more so, that in the second Trump administration, they're going to want to expand the Abraham Accords and for Israel to be able to build more relationships with Saudi Arabia and our other Sunni nations in the region. And also, Trump has even said that he is looking beyond the Palestinian state issue. He no longer believes that the Palestinian Arabs deserve a state. And I think that J.D. Vance will be another strong ally of his on the Trump-Vance ticket to look for an alternative beyond a two-state solution, which is going to be very good for Israel. Israel might also need to become more independent of the United States and maybe to start weaning ourselves away from American foreign aid and American military aid. Both of those things are going to be ultimately good for Israel.
All right, well, Rabbi Tuli Weiss, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Absolutely.
And now for Aliyah. Some 22,000 new immigrants have arrived in Israel since October 7th, according to the Jewish Agency and the Aliyah and Integration Ministry. From France alone, there has been a 510% increase in the number of case files opened by citizens wanting to come to Israel since the outbreak of the war. 6,440 people compared to 1,057 people during the same period a year ago. However, only 800 people have immigrated from France since October 7th. In general, Aliyah has declined in 2024, the Jewish Agency told ILTV editor-in-chief Maayan Hoffman. According to the agency, between January and June 2024, some 13,405 immigrants moved to the country, a decline of 51%. In the first half of the year, the majority of immigrants came from Russia and Ukraine, and 9,875. There were 352 Olim from Belarus, 394 from France, and 663 from the United States. However, the Ministry of Aliyah and Integration said last week that over 2,000 newcomers are expected to arrive on 14 Aliyah group flights over the course of the summer. We welcome the new Olim, and now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Mostly clear skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of around 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, mostly sunny skies and hot weather is expected as temperatures should reach highs of 35 degrees Celsius or 96 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channel, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, ILTV.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gravelazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.